Welcome to session 238 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 26th of August. Today we'll be looking at Mark 9 to 10 and Psalm 83. But so far in Mark, we've read through the prologue, Jesus' early ministry in Galilee, and the section on the calling and training of the disciples. Mark's Gospel opens with the assertion that Jesus is the Son of God and King that the Old Testament had been looking forward to. Jesus declared the start of his new reign by fighting spiritual warfare in the desert. Then Jesus went out and began preaching the kingdom of God is near. The kingdom of God has authority and power over the forces of darkness and over sicknesses and disease. It makes unclean things clean, as Jesus reached out and touched a leper. It doesn't control people. Instead, it leaves them free to follow or reject Jesus. The kingdom of God doesn't work like the people expected it to. It is a kingdom focused on those in need and cares more about people than laws. Then the book moved into the calling and training of the disciples. The kingdom of God is a mystery that needs wrestling with to find out and understand. We read how the kingdom of God has authority over the natural forces like storms. It expands to include Gentiles, non-Jewish lands. It includes men and women, young and old. Yet despite these miracles, there are still plenty who don't understand Jesus and what he is doing. Jesus is rejected by his hometown. King Herod thinks he's John the Baptist back from the dead. The Pharisees want a sign and evidence despite his many miracles. His own disciples think he's a ghost when he walks on water. It is only the Gentiles, those that should be far from God, who seem to grasp who he is. He heals a Gentile woman's daughter after she demonstrated great faith. She declared that even a crumb of Jesus' power could heal her daughter. He healed a man who was deaf and unable to speak and fed a crowd of 4,000 Gentiles. Repeatedly, we see that Jesus' ministry is to the whole world, not just the Jews. We then had the miracle of a blind man being healed in 2 stages, and Jesus' confession that he is the future king they've been waiting for. Peter was the first one to declare it, but then Jesus explained, as the future king, he has come to suffer and die. Peter couldn't understand this and pushed back against what Jesus was saying. Like the blind man in the middle of his healing, Peter could see in part but couldn't understand the full truth. So let's jump in with today's reading, Mark 9 to 10. Jesus takes his closest disciples, Peter, James and John, up a mountain. When they reach the top, Jesus is transfigured before them. His clothes become white and radiant. Out of nowhere, Elijah and Moses appear and begin to talk to Jesus. And then a voice comes down from heaven and declares, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." The whole story seems a bit strange, but it serves a very specific role. Going forward, things are going to get bad for Jesus. Mark wants his readers to understand that they're getting bad because that's the plan, not because he's fallen out with favour with God. On that mountain, we see Jesus in line with Moses, who brought the law, and Elijah, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. And we see God reaffirm that Jesus is his son. Whatever happens going forward, Jesus is very much in line with the Old Testament and the will of God. Coming down from the mountain, Jesus meets a man whose son is possessed by a demon so powerful it tries to drown him and throws him into fires. There are 3 key exorcism stories in Mark. The first was back in Mark 1 when Jesus started his ministry. This one was to show that the kingdom of God has authority over unclean spirits. The second was in the land of the Gerasenes, against a horde of demons who call themselves Legion. That one was to show that the kingdom of God's authority isn't limited by the amount of demons it has to deal with. Here we have the third one. It demonstrates that the kingdom of God has authority no matter how strong the demon. All the forces of darkness have to submit to the kingdom of God. Jesus casts the demon out of the child and hands him back to his father. Next comes a long section of teaching. Jesus covers topics like what does it mean to be great in the kingdom of God? Anyone who is for us can't be against us. The risk of temptation, divorce, and more. This section of teaching is open and closed by Jesus explaining to his disciples that he has to die. 2 times Jesus unpacks for them that while he is the king they've been waiting for, he is heading to Jerusalem to be mocked, beaten, and killed. Then after 3 days, he will rise again as their victorious king. The disciples can't understand what he's saying. They have no framework for a king who would suffer for his people. We can see this in the reaction of James and John. They came to Jesus and asked if they can be on his right and left when he is crowned king. Jesus tries to explain to them that's not going to look like what they're expecting, and are they sure they're willing to go through what he's about to go through? They insist, and Jesus tells them that the spots to his left and right are already taken. Then he reminds his disciples that the kingdom of God isn't about chasing after position or power. It's about serving others and laying down your life. And so we come to the end of this section of the book of Mark and what is often known as Jesus' public ministry. The final section is focused on Jesus' last days and his time in Jerusalem. But to end Jesus' public ministry, we get one more story of Jesus healing. A blind man named Bartimaeus is sitting on the side of the road when he hears Jesus coming. Immediately he shouts, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." In this statement, Bartimaeus is declaring his confidence that Jesus is the future king from the line of David. The people try to quiet him, but moved by compassion, Jesus comes to him. Asking what he wants, Bartimaeus responds, "Let me recover my sight." At that, Jesus heals him, demonstrating that Bartimaeus is right to see him as the future king. Mark wants his readers to know, just in case there was any doubt, that Jesus is this future king, and the king is about to enter the royal city. But that is Mark 9 to 10. Now let's look at Psalm 83. This psalm is attributed to Asaph, one of King David's musicians, and falls into the category of lament. Here is a summary of the structure. We have verses 1 to 8, the complaint, and then verses 9 to 18, the request. The psalmist opens with a quick request that God no longer be silent before jumping straight into their complaint. Their enemies have raised their head, enemies who hate God. They plot and they plan to see the nation of Israel wiped out. The different nations have all come together with this intention. Nations that were previously enemies are now united in their hatred of Israel. Edomites, Ishmaelites, Moabites, Hagrites, Ammonites, Amalekites, the Philistines, and more. So the psalmist makes their request of God. They ask that God defeat these nations and leaders like the ones God has defeated in the past. There's Jabin and his commander Sisera, we read about in Judges 4, and then there's Oreb, Zeb, Zebah, and Zulmunrah, all kings that Gibeon defeated in Judges 7 to 8. Each of these sought to destroy Israel and claim their land, but were defeated by God. The psalmist asks that God burn these nations up and blow the ashes away with great wind. May they realise the strength and might of God so that they would turn to him and worship him rather than to try to destroy his people. In this last section, we see the usual declarations of trust embedded in the psalmist's request. God is powerful and mighty, the Most High over all the earth. This truth gives the psalmist the confidence to make their request. Even when all the world is against them, God's people can still cry out to him and be delivered. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.